Joining me now is Sourabh Gupta with the Institute for China-America Studies. He's a senior Asia-Pacific international relations policy specialist. You get a sense that China's frustrated, that they really don't know, that this really isn't good faith negotiations because they really don't know who they're negotiating with. Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, says, time out, we got a truce. Then next thing you know, Wilbur Ross is going to China, and then you've got the president himself. Do you get that sense as well? And is it difficult to negotiate when you have so many voices and so many attitudes?
Oh, absolutely. It's very difficult to figure out and parse exactly where the administration is going. You know, when Liu He was out here, they reached that consensus with Steve Mnuchin. They went to the White House. They had a very, very nice, good chat with President Trump. And everybody thought, I mean, we're moving on the right track. And then 9 days later, there's an announcement which suddenly pops out from the White House. And then we have this announcement of tariffs, which was expected because this date had been set previously. But the point is, we know President Trump has torn up agreements in the past of other administrations. Is he going to renege on his own consensus for the very first time on an agreement? He has basically had a good faith agreement. So we'll have to watch, and I can understand everybody thinking, what's going on exactly?
Well, no one's placing bets on that because you just never know. Yale University senior fellow Stephen Roach says a trade war with China, biggest threat there is to U.S. markets. Gary Cohn, who was a top economic advisor to Trump, he's in the news because he says this is going to have a devastating impact. It could actually wipe out any gains from the tax cuts that were enacted earlier this year. Dire predictions, but will it have any impact on the Trump White House?
Oh, I think it will have an impact on the Trump White House. I think the way I see these tariffs, frankly, are still in the realm of threats. The day I see a tariff actually imposed is the day when I say yes, we are in a trade war. Yes, we've had tariffs imposed on steel and aluminum against China, but those were just $3 billion of tariffs, so people could kind of blink and let that pass. We're talking here $50 billion of tariffs. And frankly, what I see is Trump always pushing a deadline away to actually impose the tariffs. He's very happy to announce the tariffs, and he statutorily had to do so. He had to implement tariffs within 30 days, but he's put a date which is right at the far end of that 30-day period, means this is just more about pressure and trying to get a better deal in the course of negotiations, which will happen until then.
The Atlantic has a piece out. The headline reads, Trump always wanted a trade war, and now he's got several. The piece ends by saying the tariffs were preordained. It's more than likely that the economic consequences will be as well. Can he fight a trade war on so many different fronts, and what will be the economic ramifications of this?
He cannot fight a trade war on so many fronts. Things are actually going to get worse with his allied partners, the EU, Canada, Mexico, and Japan. Things are going to get worse in the months ahead. Frankly, on the China front, there has been very good progress in the negotiations, actually, in the last 1 month since the Mnuchin-He consensus in Beijing when Wilbur Ross went. So things are actually moving forward, and this is perhaps to put more pressure on the Chinese to concede more in those negotiations. And therefore, my feeling is that he cannot fight all these trade wars simultaneously. It is going to hurt him in his election. China is the ground where most of these ag and energy products are sold, which can really impact him in the red states. And therefore, from my point of view, I think this is more threat. But of course, I mean, things are so fluid, one can never say for certain.
And Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau basically came out and said, look, you can't be bullied. You got to stand up. And that seems to be the response from each one of these countries, the European Union as well. Is there a way that you can create an exit for all of these countries where everybody can save face?
That's the really hard part, and that's particularly the hard part for the allies, because China has areas where it needs to liberalize and space for liberalization, and it is doing that now autonomously and in the context of these bilateral negotiations. For a lot of the allies, there are developed countries which are following the rules of the road on international trade and really don't have much to give. And therefore, it's that much harder for the allies to push back against Mr. Trump than it is for China. And I see actually fruitful, productive bargains being worked out with China, even though one can, as I say, never be certain because of this Trump White House. But I can see, I mean, things are very fluid at this point of time.
Yeah, we're going to keep our eye on it, that's for sure. Sourabh Gupta, always a pleasure having you in. Thanks so much.
Thank you.